Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next series in the Deep Crawl webinar series. My name is Jon Myers, and if that tunes in, I'm sure you know me by now. I've obviously been hosting these for some time now. And again, we have a great topic and a wonderful presenter for you today. Today, we will cover demonstrating the value of SEO. It's been an ongoing conversation for many, many years now, is actually proving the value of SEO and how you bring that to the marketing plan and how you talk to the CMO about that. And ultimately how you give SEO the value that it truly deserves when it's going on to a client's or an agency's media plan as a whole. As I mentioned, we have a fantastic presenter today by the name of Miracle Inameti-Archibong. Hopefully I got that right, Miracle. Welcome to the Deep Crawl webinar. I did okay there, brilliant, thank you. I was really worrying about getting that right or getting that wrong, but thank you, I'm glad I got there in the end. But again, fantastic, it's great to have you here with us, Miracle. For anybody out there that doesn't know, Miracle is the head of SEO at Erudite, and she's been around the search industry now for around about 10 years. So starting to become a bit of a veteran there as well, which is wonderful to see. And it's great to see you go on a journey through many agency guises and different agencies that you work with, and obviously to the agency that you're with today, which is a fantastic company to be at. You're also a regular speaker and trainer out there in the space, and obviously being seen now at Brighton SEO and the various places out there. People congregate, so I'm sure people have come across what some of the topics that you're going to talk about today and things that you've shared. So I'm very much looking forward to obviously this presentation as well and getting into the detail. For you guys that have not joined us before, we're going to be going through the usual sort of format. We're going to do around about 30 minutes of presentation, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Please, please, please don't wait to ask your questions. Please submit your questions as we go, because the worst thing in the world is getting that last minute rush of questions towards the end and going through and waiting for them to turn up as you arrive at the end. So if there's a thing you'd like to ask a question on as we're talking through, submit it to us via the chat box as normal on the right hand side. We'll pick those questions up, and then when we get into the Q&A process, I can ask those questions back to Miracle and chip in along the way if needs be as well. As normal, the webinar is recorded. We always have done this, and again it will be live later this week on the Deep Crawl blog with a full write-up for anybody that wants to download it, take it away and re-listen to those hot topics that we're going to discuss today. And please, please do fill in the survey at the end. It only takes about 15 seconds, and we really do like your feedback. Tell us what we're doing well. Tell us what we're doing badly. Where can we improve? Who would you like to see on here? Give us all that feedback that we'd like to know, because we want to improve this thing for you. So without further ado, we're 5 minutes in, and I'd like to hand over to Miracle for the next 30 minutes or so, and I'm going to chip in along the way and ask some questions as we go today on proving the value of SEO. Ultimately, it's one of those topics that's been hot off the press for many years now, and we're really going to get to the bottom of that today over the next 30 minutes to an hour of presentation. So get those questions ready, as I mentioned. And without further ado, I'm going to be quiet for a little bit, and I'm going to hand you over to our presenter today, Miracle, who is the head of SEO at Erudite. Welcome to the Deep Crawl webinar, Miracle.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the lovely introduction. Cool. All right, guys. So hope you can see my screen. John's already introduced me. As I said, I work with Erudite, which is a technical marketing agency, and we primarily specialize in SEO, CRO, and data insight. So that's what I do. So without further ado, I'm going to go into the topic of proving the value of your campaign. Now, how many people have heard this? Can we SEO the site now? And I think that's the major problem that we come across when we are pitching for a new client, or we're pitching for client renewals, or even trying to upsell the client. We come across this fundamental lack of understanding of what SEO is and what SEO does. The client really, probably the CMOs have heard about SEO, they know it's something they need, but they don't understand the core values of it. It might be because previously they've worked with an agency that has failed to fully put the SEO metrics to them in a way that they understand, or bring any of the commercials to the forefront of the campaign. Or they've Googled and they've, there's always, if you Google is SEO a scam, there's about 1.something million results. And if you go to Quora, there's loads and loads of questions of how to weed out the SEO agency. And there are even clients that have come across that think that because they spend a lot on PPC, they can just get a dial to someone in the organic team who's in charge of the SERPs and get their rankings up. I mean, I've even, I got into a heated argument on the local forum in my area on Facebook where someone was guaranteeing someone position 1 in the rankings within like 6 months of being with them. So we've had all these legacy issues in SEO, and that kind of stops us from being able to really push SEO forward as a service. And so today we're going to be addressing some of the issues and how we can, you know, talk about SEOs to CMOs and anyone in the C-suite really that really brings SEO to the front of their attention and makes them interested.
Yeah, I think it's really good points that you're making there, Miracle. I think especially with the C-suite one, I mean, obviously as a little aside, you're absolutely right. Anybody that kind of comes along to you and says, I'm going to guarantee you this position in 6 months, you run for the hills, everybody. I mean, it's as simple as that. Get away. It's never going to happen. There's better ways of looking at SEO than that, obviously. But I think, as you mentioned, the C-suite is a key one. And for me, and maybe, you know, get your view on it as well, Miracle, how do you talk to the CMO? You've got to talk to the CMO in a different language that you talk to the SEO in and the head of SEO in, because if we kind of go in there and try and talk in the same language, the CMO is baffled, to say the least, because they kind of know they need to do SEO, but they kind of don't know what it is, and they're getting better at it now, and they're kind of understanding it better, but they're still in a position where they're scared of it, even though they know it needs to be on their media plan and it needs to be probably one of the first things there, because from a traffic acquisition point of view, it'd be one of the biggest. But are there certain things that you would, you know, change up in the way that you talk to a CMO than you would talk to an SEO as such?
Yeah, and this is the way we approach it. So in every campaign we do, at every point in time, we always bring the commercials to the forefront of the campaign. The CEOs, the C-suite, they understand money, and that is the core end to the business. Yes, you want traffic, you want rankings, but those are just an end to it, just a way to an end. And at the end of the day, everyone is interested in money. So when we go to pitches, when we go to contract renewals, when we're trying to upsell, one of the things we focus on are the client goals. So we don't go with a task list of all the wonderful things that we need to do, although that can really be exciting as a technical SEO specialist. I see things that I want to unravel and I get really giddy with excitement. But I need to always remember that that's not what is important to the client. Yes, they want a good site, but they want to make money. And so the way we go first is to ask the client, what are your goals? And we're really strategic about this. We say, what are your revenue targets for the year? And then what's the company direction? Because we need to look at all of this from a holistic point of view. We need to look at the short-term goals and the long-term goals and plan towards it. So what I'm essentially saying here is that care about the metrics that they care about. And it's just about caring about revenue and not SEO tasks, because these tasks are just like a means to an end. So once we get them thinking about the goals, and once they see that we can align ourselves to the company goals, and then we're a core part of reaching these goals, because once everyone sets a target, they want to meet that target. And so that target gives you something to look forward to. That target brings you to the meetings in front of the commercial directors. And these are the people approving the budget. These are the people signing the checks, not the SEO manager, not the marketing manager, because those people know that they need this service and they'll have to pitch it, and they need to get the other people on board that are signing the checks. But once you're talking about commercials with your clients and they know you understand the commercials, then you get put forward into these big meetings. If not, you only get into meetings with the marketing manager and they have to take that forward. And sometimes they're not really good at selling your service. So when we find out what their goals are, then we need to make sure that these targets are realistic, because sometimes I know that everyone feels that everything, you know, the targets are based on data, but sometimes it's based on like how much marketing budget can I squeeze out? And then people say, we're going to achieve 20% on, and I'm like, yeah, how? Is it realistic? How did you get this target? How did you forecast this? And why we do this is because if we're going to say SEO is going to return a certain ROI, we need to make sure that we can achieve this, and we need to make sure that the data is robust. And so we do our own forecasting. And our forecasting, we use statistical modeling. So usually in the days, I guess this is still done if you're forecasting based on keywords. So you have a bunch of keywords times by average search volume. I've used AWR in the past to get the average conversion rate, click-through rate, sorry, for different sectors, you times it by that, you times it by the average of the value, and then you get your revenue forecast. However, this is limited because you only have a certain number of keywords. I mean, it's pie in the sky how the keywords will fluctuate. And several times you have like marketing managers, because of budgets, they're like, can you make sure we get 10%, we get 20%, and you can really manipulate that data however you want the forecast to look. So that's kind of pie in the sky. However, what we tend to do is use statistical modeling for our forecasting, and we use the Excel forecast tool, and we do linear regression, which is just a way of predicting the outcome of something based on two or more variants. And then we use exponential smoothing. Exponential smoothing, what it basically does is that, several times you might have like a surge of money into PPC, and that creates outliers in the data. You might have seasonal spikes, and that also creates outliers in the data. So exponential smoothing would just sum up everything and take an average and just smoothing the data out. And so we use the Excel data forecasting tool for that, and then we plug in 2 to 3 years of data, and you need a robust data set in order to get a proper forecast. And the Excel forecasting tool also has a confidence model, so you can even select how confident you are in your data and how robust you think it is. And that's how we do our forecasting. So we use, loads of data. This is like a data dump. We never show the client this because this is just too much data for anyone to comprehend. But this is the amount of data that we plug in. We plug in organic data, we plug in PPC, we plug in CRM, we plug in display, every other channel, because what this does is it helps you to get a more holistic view of what the company is spending and how different channels affect each other. And so based on this, we create 3 forecast models. And so we do a cautious, a moderate, and an optimistic. And why we do this is because we know that any forecast or any kind of recommendation is only as good as the client implementing it, and how fast they react to change and how fast things are going to be put into production, because we know that SEO takes time. It takes time for Google to crawl, evaluate the site, for rankings to grow, for things to improve. So we always, do a cautious, and moderate, and optimistic. Optimistic is I give you recommendations today, your dev team works overnight, and tomorrow bish bang bong, it's all done. But we know that never happens, and that's why we do this. What we also do for our clients, because we want them to know that we are being realistic, we're not just trying to hoodwink them. We do a do nothing model, and the do nothing model is, if a client is out there, they're already ranking, chances are that they will see some growth without SEO. However, with our service, you will see additional growth. And so we try to tell them, yes, you might see, 10% growth. However, if you want to achieve 30%, if you want to achieve 50%, you need SEO. And using that method enables you to quickly calculate an ROI. And so this is the additional gains the client will have, plus the cost of your service. You know how to calculate percentages divided by the spend. And that gives you a rough ROI of what your service, of what the client is investing and what they expect to get in return. And then you can take this to them and be like, well, if you use us, you will get, 1,000% increase. You get 10% return on your investment. And this is always eye-catching, because the client knows that you're thinking about the money. You're not just thinking about getting the money from them and going off, but you're thinking about what additional value you can contribute to their goals for the year. And this is a client that's been with us for 5 years now, and I didn't want to use the current data because COVID's messed everything up, but we have consistently used this method of forecasting for them. And in the year 2018, we came up just 2% under our initial optimistic forecast. And we are so confident in this that sometimes we do this on like a commission model. And this way of forecasting is so much better than, using keywords to forecast and exponenting data from there. Cool. And so once you get that sorry, go ahead, Jon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because obviously you talked about some great stuff in there from a forecasting point of view, and I wish more companies doing it this way and actually looking at how you can kind of in a way put your money where your mouth is, and actually do that where you're working on a commission only basis and saying, hey, we're going to do this, and if we do this, we get this. which in the current climate and from a performance point of view is I'm sure for clients is fantastic to see. Do you have to kind of, because obviously over the years you've worked with many agencies, have you found that you can kind of convince the client that this is how we're going to report on it and this is how we're going to do it? Or do you find that clients want to kind of try and tweak it and make it fit for their, metrics in some respects? Or, you haven't to kind of always.
Always.
That's why you go like, no performance-based, no commission-based model. You get what you get, kind of.
Always.
But then,
that's why we have the three types of model. That's why we have the cautious, the moderate, the optimistic, because the optimistic most of the time is always based on the client's forecast. But we always go for like the cautious to moderate. So we know, based on experience, you can tell based on the site, what the site is doing, based on how bad they are, what the competition is, what that change you're driving will leverage in an increase. And so we have a sense of what is going to be. And the clients, as I said earlier on, is always based on how much money they want to get into that channel or what the marketing spend is or whatever. But we try to be as realistic as possible, because what we don't want is a client saying, the clients you retain are the happy clients. There's no point promising and under delivering. So we only, we forecast, this is the data. And if we're heavily relying on data, then there's no point in, so that's why we have three ways. That's why we have the three systems, really, because we find that
which totally makes a lot of sense. And then do you kind of then find that outside of the performance data, they're going to want these metrics that they want to report on, that they kind of can take back to the business and go, well, we have this rankings, we have these, the various types of metrics that as a business they might need to see. And then I kind of guess it's your job to kind of, back them down in some ways and say, look, don't focus on that, focus on ROI and focus on the delivery piece.
Yes, and I get to monitoring keywords, because at the end of the day, keywords will always be important to SEO. But again, I'll leave that for that slide. But what we try to do is to steer people away from obsessing about keywords, because keywords are just a means to an end. Like, what you want is people coming to your site, buying. You want to see that revenue increase. And in as much as we always have clients wanting massive data studio reports, I don't know how many times, John, you will say that actually log in and check that, apart from whoever's in charge of SEO. You look at the stat for people logging in to check that. Like, to the client, I guess it conveys a kind of value. So when they see this massive report, it's like, well, you spend time, but how many people are actually using it and how many people actually understand it? They're like top 5 keywords, 5 keywords they care about, and then they obsess about those. The rest, no one's. So
dashboards is a buzzword, and they're just ticking the buzzword bingo box kind of thing in some respects, and making sure they've kind of come to you and asked that, because you're right, you do see that a lot where clients just actually ask you for a whole manner of things and then don't engage and actually log in and use what you give to them. So then what's the actual value that you've added there, and what time have you wasted in some respects? So it's great to see that you guys are kind of working through a certain model that kind of goes, this is what's going to happen, and we're pretty confident it's going to fit in the mix.
That's not to say we do the dashboards, because again, it conveys value to people, but we know that they're not looking at it. And if you want to get in front of the commercial managers, the financial directors, the people that are actually signing the checks, they're never going to look at those reports, and that's not what you need, really.
Agreed.
Cool. So when we establish what the goals are, what the KPI, what the revenue target is, then we need to make sure that, again, as I say, as you just mentioned, what KPIs are important to the business. So we speak to, obviously, you are reporting to the marketing manager, and that you have to keep them sweet, if I use that word. And so we say, what are the KPIs that are important to you as a business? And most of the time, we try to steer them towards revenue. Again, that's important to all. And if it's a B2B business, it will be lead generations, download resources, emails, whatever thing, and search engagement, because getting people to your site is one thing, getting them to engage with your content and actually having that content convert is a different thing. Again, the next thing we look at is what SEO KPIs will drive the most change. So once we look at, these are the goals of the business, how can we convert that into SEO task? And then we list all of the KPIs and we do a benchmark and we say, okay, what are the tools that we need to track this, and what do we need to set up to make sure that these KPIs are measurable? And then we create a data brief. And so that data brief will list every metric that is important to the client, very, very granular. This is just a sample of, this is one page out of like a 5-page data brief. And then how are we going to track it? Are we going to track it in GA? Are we going to track it in GTM? So this data brief, what it does is establish the KPIs that are important to SEO and the client, how granular it needs to be and what tracking method we are going to use. So we agree on all the measuring tools before we start the campaign. Another important thing is data hygiene. So we are doing all of these forecasting, we are doing all of these measurements, and the ROI is all based on data. And I've talked about, establishing how robust the client's data is. And so something that's really, really important to us as an agency is data hygiene. So 80% of the analytics accounts we see are incorrectly set up. Analytics is really good because, it's free. A free tool that tracks your traffic, that gives you loads of data. It's good. But out of the box, it's a free tool. And anything that's free will have its complexities. You need to set it up right. And we've seen clients time and time again just use analytics as it is out of the box. And they come to us with predictions like, you're making important financial decisions based on this data. You need to make sure that the data is sound. We've seen forecasts come out of analytics data that is so wrong and so terrible that we've revised it and it's like 300% down. And the client's like, how did this happen? We're like, this is your forecast, based on data that is faulty. And so we always, when a client comes to us, do a data hygiene. And so some of the things that we find out that are wrong with, and these are just some of the common problems. There's so much more we could go into, but that's a whole talk on its own. But what we see is that people don't set up filters. And what filters, because analytics is a sample of data, what filters help you to do is, to segment that data and give you a bigger sample set to create, more granular views, and make sure that when you set up filters, you always retain your raw data. Because we've seen clients come to us and say, well, our blog traffic is not converting, and so we've just filtered it out. And we're like, but then we can find out why this traffic is not converting and then try and improve this. But you filtered it out, you don't have a raw view, you've just lost all that data, and so we can't do anything with it. So make sure that you don't have a single view. At least you have a raw view, you have a test view for when you want to implement tracking and try out things to make sure they work before you push them live. Another thing that I commonly see is the wrong name. So clients do a migration from HTTP to HTTPS or from subdomain, and they don't even bother to change the name of the account. And what this does is that it spikes the referral data. And so again, creating, wrong data in wrong snippet in the part of the source, in the wrong part of the source code. Now you're supposed to put the code as high up as possible, but you see people put it in the middle because they tried to put it in the head and it broke, and they just thought, yes, fine, so far the code is there, we'll leave it there. However, if the code doesn't fire as soon as the page loads, then that page might not get counted, or you have a very high bounce rates because it's saying that people have left the page. Meanwhile, the code is not firing before. We've also seen like 2 codes in the page from like an old GA account that they used to use, or people using both GTM and GA codes. You just need one. Incorrect goals and event setup. Oh, we're tracking this, it's not working. We've launched this campaign and it's not working, and then you check and everything is wrongly set up. Referral exclusion list. This is really important for people who send customers away to like third-party sites to either pay or fill up forms, and that third-party site will count as a referral if you don't exclude it from the list. Enhanced e-commerce. My personal favorite is when people say, well, we've set up enhanced e-commerce, and then you go, they've just ticked the box, but they haven't bothered to create a data layer. And what the data layer gives you is an enhanced view of your checkout. You can see, you can create sophisticated reports straight from the content to see where people are dropping off, people add into basket, codes use. There's so much more you can do than just put ticking the enhanced e-commerce box. You need to set up the data layer. And the PPI, personal identifying information, this is so old, like you would think that this would not come up, but I have actually seen whole people's payment information in the source code because that was being pulled in. So those are just a few things that I've just put in there that are common issues that you can just look at now in your account and fix. But we have a whole, Erudite has created a whole free analytics audit template, and I've listed some of these issues and explained them in greater detail, and then you can just download our free template at an Audit site. Cool. Then we go to monitoring keywords. So we talked about this, John, when you say to people, yes, keywords are I mean, SEO keywords. I don't know how, if those two things can be divorced, although I'm seeing Google is trying hard and hard to stay.
Very much trying harder and harder to scare us away and run us away from it. And I think it's an interesting conversation. I mean, I can certainly think back a few years where people were just obsessed with keyword rankings.
Yep.
Literally so obsessed to the point where, you know, it was live and die by the keyword moving up on a month-by-month basis. You know, and if you think about many years, it was, you know, Google had a static index, so it was only crawling once a month. Obviously now it crawls on a multiple series on a month-by-month, you know, within the month, because it needs to, because of the, you know, the size of the index. So you'd kind of live by the fact that you'd run your reports and you'd wait till the end of the next month and then run your report again and see if the keywords had moved.
Yeah.
And it still amazes me, sort of 20 years later virtually, that people are still obsessed with the hero bit, you know, the hero ranking. I want to be number one on this keyword. I need to be number one on this keyword. And you're still then obsessed with, well, am I number one on this keyword? So, I mean, from your point of view, are there good keyword monitoring tools out there? You know, which ones do you guys kind of recommend to actually get true rankings in some respect?
It's really difficult with keyword tools, and I know they all try to do their best. We use SEM Rush now, and we use Systrix. There's other two that we use in-house, but the problem with these tools is that, you know, there's like, it depends on where the crawler comes from. There's like, you know, there's personalization, people are logged in, location, the searcher's language, privacy. There's so much variation in the rankings, different places. So it's really hard to track the exact ranking, you know, for your keyword at every point in time. And so we try to we track it based on, like, we use it as a checker. So what we do is, you know, when you do your keyword research and then you have your categories, and then we map our URLs to these categories, and so we just check how categories are doing, and we also set up content grouping for our clients. So we check, you know, how a category is doing, and based on our content grouping, we check GA and see, you know, how is traffic performing to those categories, how is conversions in those categories, and we sort of look at those things side by side. We tend not to just look at keyword in isolation, and we really try and discourage clients from looking at keywords in isolation. I think because
no, I think you're absolutely right to do that. So it's kind of your keyword trending rather than keyword tracking. So I think, you know, the way that you're talking about it is actually, are you on an upwards trend? Are you trending downwards from a point of view of traffic acquisition from that keyword group, rather than the client phoning you up and going, oh, I'm sure I was second on this keyword yesterday, and now I'm number 3 or number 4 the day after, kind of thing. And it's you know, there's a certain level of training required of, you know, restraint in some respects, and getting the client on board with what you're trying to achieve, and, you know, the sense of, I've got more traffic, I've got twice as much traffic for you, but then they're going with the keyword drop from position 2 to position 5.
Yeah, there's so much value in long tail that people like, and because you don't have that visibility on all the long tail traffic, it's just it can be quite annoying for clients to focus on one hero keyword, and we try as much as possible to educate our clients away from that. I think where it becomes difficult, I see most often, is in owner founders that have a little background in SEO. Oh, that's so dangerous. That is so dangerous.
No, it's absolutely dangerous. And it's those sorts of companies where the owner and founder is effectively the MD of the business, but it also is in charge of marketing. So it's kind of their money that you're spending, and they have a lot more of a personal investment in the whole process kind of thing. And as you say, they read blogs, attend conferences, and then think they're dangerous in some respects.
Yes, they have just enough knowledge to be, to be dangerous about SEO. It's so painful to be like, stop with the keywords, stop. I remember back in the day when I first started, I used to have like monitoring tools. I think it was Stat I used then. I used to have Stat on the app on my phone, and I used to like wake up. My job was first thing in the morning. I had to check the keywords, what's moved, what's not moved, and if it's moved one position, like write a whole analysis piece on why it's moved and what we're going to do to change that. Oh God.
Yeah.
Hello 99, giving me nightmares.
You seem like you're in a better place than that these days.
Yes. Zen. Oh, cool. So yeah, let's get through this. So cool. Setting up tracking. I mean, the natural evolution for that is once you've determined what you want to track, then you need to set up tracking. And for this, you just determine, sorry, my eyes. You just need to determine if you're going to track using GA or GTM. And so basically with GA, you need to set up custom dimensions. If you're tracking just using GA, you need to set up custom dimensions, and you need dev time. So for us, it's always better to set up GTM, and GTM Google Tag Manager allows you to deploy code without the needs of devs. And we all know this is another major issue and major topic in the SEO industry, lack of dev time too. And so if you can just circumvent that by using GTM to set up a lot of your tracking, I mean, win-win. And there's so many other things that you can use GTM for apart from setting up tracking. There's like various SEO tasks that you can implement, like canonical, schema, so many things that you can do with GTM. For me, it's a win-win. If you're not using GTM, why not? You can also use it to set up like third-party tools that you can use to monitor errors. I think one of the things that happens a lot with e-commerce sites is that you'll have customer service saying, well, clients have called and said they're trying to buy something and this broke, and you're like, dev still is like, yeah, log that in, and can you tell us exactly what they did? And you do exactly what the customer said they did, and you can't replicate that error. So if you have things like GTM, you can set up like Hotjar, and then you can review videos of how the client used your site, and then you can replicate those errors and send it. I think one of the ways this really helped us was during COVID. I think I saw that Next took down their entire site instead of just disabling their checkout. And one of the issues might be that there was a lot of dev resource that needed to go behind disabling the checkout. So what we were able to do for one of our clients is that using Optimize, we're able to disable the add to cart bag for the entire site before they could disable the checkout. And so these are things that you can do and show additional value to your clients. And in here, I've just written some examples of things you can track, and I've talked about it. So, tracking for conversion and revenue, setting up enhanced e-commerce, Hotjar for recording and replicating errors and seeing how people use your site, record leads, subscription, tap to call videos, and other things you can do, tracking your site's health, 404 page, JavaScript errors, content grouping I mentioned before, tracking content on your site to see what's easily diagnosed, especially for large sites, how different content groups are performing, rolling up accounts. We've seen clients who have like their blog on a subdomain because for one reason or the other, they can't put it on the same site, and then you need to roll up the account to find out how everything is doing, installing third-party tools. And this is a very interesting blog post by Julius Federici. Oh God, I practiced this name so many times. Federici on 99 things you can do with Google Tag Manager. So that's a good one to read to find out what else you can do. Finally, reporting. Reporting is important. I know we've made a joke about dashboards, but dashboards is still important because yes, they communicate value to the clients. They also enable you to find trends, to see what's happening, to diagnosis. Even though the client might not understand all that data, for you it's important to be able to report effectively. And if you look at Google's custom report. I love it because there are times I'm trying to stitch various bits of data together, and I'm like, I don't know if I put this breaks. I don't know how to. If you haven't used this before, you can see so many people have done that before you. Like if you can't create your own, steal, buy, borrow. I do that a lot. I go into this gallery and I search for like different reports that I'm trying to stitch together, and I just import them and create mine. You can use the GA API and use it on Google Sheets to pull out more data. And Data Studio is really good because Data Studio, Google Sheets is not really, it's not cute, but Data Studio helps you to build very interesting dashboards that your client can just log into and update anytime for any kind of internal reporting. Because we see this a lot, clients be like, oh, I'm having a meeting now, can you pull this XYZ data? If you've built that whole Data Studio report, you can just click refresh, you can just select the dates you want, and you can pull out whatever metrics. I think the thing to be cautious about reporting is that don't just look at, the overall report on the overall numbers, because I used to make this mistake a lot when I just started out, and I see this where clients would be like, well, these are our old reports, these are the things, and I'm like, yeah, but what the agency had failed to do is report on the impact of the work. So what we try to do, especially as a tech agency, is whenever we implement a change, whenever we do something, we try to say this is the impact of the work that we did, and we try to present interesting graphs and show you and try and calculate ROI on that specific task. So this is speed. We did a speed audit and we implemented the speed. And we're trying to show the client, the impact of our work. So we reported on the metric to say, yes, speed has gone up. It was like 40 and now your site is 80. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we showed them this lovely graph to show this is when we highlighted the speed issues. This is what the conversion rate for that page was. Now you've actioned it. See, literally there's a step change here, and you can see what the additional revenue is. And we calculated that additional revenue times the average order value, the conversion rate times the average order value, to give the clients very nice, a very nice percentage on the increase in revenue. And so instantly that shows everyone, well, this is the additional revenue this task has brought. We shared this with the dev team, and so that they can quantify the value of pushing that change through and doing all that work. And so next time they're not just thinking about, because the dev team doesn't really care about your rankings, that's not what their review is on, that's not what their objective is. So when you show them things like revenue, it makes more sense on why this is important and why we need to do this. And I've just shared with you some interesting tools that are really good for when you're trying to work with GA and GTM, for debugging, for making sure that your tags are working. And some interesting people that you can follow, like Anna Lewis just did an interesting seminar with remote SEO. She's really good. Jill, absolutely love Jill. I follow her all the time, and we have interesting resources on our site, erudite.agency/insights, where we write about Google Analytics a lot. And Simon, everyone knows Simon. He did this really, really mind-blowing, implementing GTM on your server. That's absolutely mind-blowing. And Julius, yeah. So these are people to follow if you love GA and data and GTM. And thank you. I hope you've learned something new and interesting today.
Thank you, Miracle. Great content and great list at the end there of people that you should think about, which is I couldn't agree more. There's some fantastic people on that list from a GA perspective. Just thinking about that from a resource point of view as well. Gabrielle asked a question, just when you were going through the Data Studio piece, are there any good tips or resources for Data Studio? And obviously there wasn't one on that list. So I just wondered if there's anybody or anything off the top of your head that you would kind of go, look, it's a great place. Because I know Data Studio is like on the tip of everybody's tongue. And everybody's like, yeah, we need to use it. We need to get away from Excel and run for the hills and all that sort of thing. But yeah. is there good resources for that? Where can people learn about?
Yeah, Aleda Solis writes a lot about Data Studio. She writes a lot about it, and there's several templates that she's She's published recently, so that's one to follow. I think Hannah Butcher, does she do Data Studio or Google Sheets? But those are the two people to follow. They do a lot of things in Data Studio and Google
Fantastic.
Sheets. Yeah.
No, good shouts on both fronts on that as well. Just as a bit of just a review thing, is Rebecca Weishman's just asked, can you share the URL for the GA audit template again?
Yes, I'll share that on Twitter. Yeah.
I think she missed it. So if you could just throw out the GA audit template again, that would be awesome. She's keen to obviously just scribble that down, or if I can't remember which slide it was on, we can shoot back there quickly and have a quick look for it.
Let me see. I can share it afterwards on Twitter. It's fine, but I will say, yeah, because there's going to be a lot to
slide 26, wasn't it? I found it there offline.
Yeah, that's it. There, 26. Yeah.
There you go. So we'll give Rebecca 10 seconds to grab that one, and I'll ask you another question while we're in, and then we can go obviously back to the other end of the deck. Just from a categories point of view, you talked about earlier on, do you check out categories based on product URL keywords or keywords category group?
So it depends. Yeah, the SEO answer. It depends on the website, and sometimes we do categories based on like navigational, transactional. It just depends when we review the website and what the client needs to improve, or sometimes we do it based on like the keyword level. I think the head term. So I guess if you have like skirts, blouse, tops, and that would all be dresses, but that's so granular. So it depends. Most of the time when we are setting up content grouping in GA, it's more of a, product kind of, informational, that kind of level. Yeah. No,
absolutely. And, I couldn't agree with you on that sense. I think it's just, just to clarify that one there for Philip. Wouter's asking quite a long question in some respects, but we're going to work through this one for you, Wouter. In the cases where websites has a lot of small or big technical issues, so things like uncompressed styling or images, so that things where obviously SEO hasn't been done well in the sense of dealing with best practice, how do you get the customer to see the value in improving these behind the scenes technical issues, even if the website visitors doesn't really notice any changes directly? So obviously, I guess where Wouter's coming from is the website's doing really well, it's got good traffic, it's got volume, but they haven't done the core technical foundations well. Do you have a way of, kind of giving them the value that if you do these things, this is what it will add? Or is it kind of just a these things need to be done sort of process?
I think competitors are a very good way to shout out to your clients where they're not doing well. If you can find competitors that are doing it well and they are growing, even if they're on the same level with your clients, you can say to them, you see, your site would decay if you don't get ahead of the competition. Your competitors are doing this, and whilst Google may not have reevaluated your site now, eventually they will get ahead. Because I think the way I always put it is, two of us are in the same race, we have the same strength, we have the same capabilities. What will make me go further than you? If you want to be ahead of the competitor, you have to stay ahead. So whilst now doing nothing, you might still be enjoying that privilege, but just think about it on that level. What can I be? What does it take for me to be ahead of my competition? And that always works that always at least gets the client thinking, they like a bit of competition.
No, it's in competition's healthy at the end of the day. And I think you frame it really well, because Google of today is somebody that likes you, and Google of tomorrow or next week potentially has, doesn't like you because things have changed or things have moved. I mean, usually Google's quite good at keeping us up to date with all of the, the major algorithmic changes, but they are constantly tinkering and tweaking and moving things around. So I'm a big advocate of do your technical SEO well and get your foundations built well before you then go on to build the house at the end of the day and do all the nice stuff. So I think that's a great way of looking at it. I like the analogy as well. Just talking about tools and stuff like that, Shelley's asking a question, what would, it's the standard sort of question that you get in some respects. What are the top 3 tools you would use to show SEO metrics and ultimately the value of SEO? You mentioned a couple earlier on. Just out of interest, what's in your back pocket for showing and proving the values?
I think Excel is my, if I don't know if it's a tool in that respect, but of what you mean. But Excel is my go-to thing for dumping data and then trying to manipulate it to get, Excel is my go-to anytime too, because I would always pull all the data available to me. So I would do Search Console, I would do whatever tracking tool that for me it will be SEMrush, because that's what we use, or Systrix, and then try and stitch that to what GA is saying. So Excel is my go-to for dumping things into. I tend not to, in terms of metrics, I tend not to use one tool or rely on what one tool is saying. I really like to pull all the raw data and create and stitch it together myself, because I'm more confident in that. Because the thing is, yeah, when you check one tool is different, you check another tool is different. So I really like to pull the data in its rawest form and put it into Excel and then stitch it together. That's what works for me, really.
No, I don't think there's probably a lot of people out there today that are still still Excel junkies and still using it for all the obvious things that you can use it for. At the end of the day, Excel, I think Excel is a tool, and I think it's a powerful tool, and if you use it in the right way, there's many things that you can do with that. So some good tool tips, suggestions there for Shelley, but Excel is ringing through as your favorite in this process. So it's always interesting just to see who expects on what. Adrian's just asking the question, because we talked about dashboards quite a while back, and everybody likes a dashboard, and everybody wants to build a dashboard, and obviously Data Studio has given us some capabilities around that, but there's many other sort of dashboard providers out there. And he just kind of asked the question, can you expand on dashboards and what you would typically include in a dashboard for a client metrics as such, to show value and progression, or is that kind of driven by bespokely by the client, or do you kind of have that kind of out the box approach to say, look, these are the things that we can track for you?
I think most of our dashboards are driven by the client, because there's no point in just collecting data for data's sake. But generally, the dashboards you would see are, it's the core metrics: organic traffic. We have a selection of like top 100 keywords that we monitor, and top URLs and how they're performing. That kind of, it will be visits, conversion rates. I guess because we're a CRO agency, and that's really important to us as well, and revenue. However, when we create these massive dashboards, we don't tend to send them to the clients in isolation. We'll also create an impact report using PowerPoint, and then pull out, this is what you've achieved this month, and pull out the top figures. However, this is what we've done to help you achieve that. So whereas the metrics are standard, the normal metrics are standard, but I will pull out what we've done and highlight how that has impacted the work that we've done, highlight how that has impacted the results that we've achieved.
No, definitely. And I'm just touching on that again, just to group another question in there. Stephen's just asking around, and I think we've talked around it a little bit, but just to specifically ask the question, he says, do you use any specific tools for the measurement and the forecasting? I'm going to get a feeling I might hear the word Excel here in a minute, but
yeah, I did mention that.
Where do you get the data? Where do you get the data from to put it into Excel? Let's go with it that way.
Okay, so the data we get, it depends on what analytic tool your client is using. Most of my clients use Excel, but the forecasting tool, you can use data from anywhere. So far you have your revenue data, whichever analytics tool they're using, then get 3 years worth of it, dump it in there, try and get as much data as possible. We also ask our clients if they have any external sales tracking tools, we get data from there as well to compare it to what is in Excel, and we go with whichever one they're using, because Excel doesn't, we all know, with cookie tracking, with all of, some people having JavaScript disabled, a lot of mobile phones now, you can just turn off the cookies for GA and you don't get the full picture of what your income is. So whatever analytics tool that the client is willing to give us the data from, we use that. Excel, it's an Excel calculation. It takes whatever data you put into it, really. but GA
No,
is what we tend to use the most.
And I think most people out there probably use GA, as you touched on earlier on. At the end of the day, it's a free tool, and it's very good in what you need to actually extract, obviously, from the website. I mean, you talked about obviously those horror stories earlier on and the things that you've seen, and I was kind of nodding away and chuckling in some respects when you started talking about things like the e-commerce tracking, and that's in the wrong hands, that just goes so badly wrong. It's unbelievable.
We had a client. I've seen data where someone was tracking VAT, I think -20%, and that data had been wrong for so long. It was so bad. So yeah.
No, and I couldn't agree. The VAT one of the classics I always saw was nobody, and I know people think about it these days as well, is returns. So actually including into the data, returns, because as we know in the world that we live in, that people order a load of shopping, a load of clothes, they try them all on, and then they send half of them back. So unless you're actually building in that returns metric, you're actually optimizing to a CPA that isn't true. Because you're optimizing to what you sent out the building, not what went out the building, what people kept and what came back. So it's an interesting one to kind of understand. And we've got a question around e-commerce from Philip. He specifically said as well, using Deep Crawl to conduct your e-commerce website analysis of your content group, how would you report on the insights of the content suggestions? So I think taking that question and broadening it away from specifically Deep Crawl, if you're using, obviously, and you're conducting an e-commerce website analysis of the content, content groups within that e-commerce website, how would you go about reporting your insights and ultimately the content suggestions that you would, as an SEO, would make? Do you have a certain format that you would report, or a template that you would use to do that?
I think with content reporting, especially for large sites, it's really difficult because there is no, you can't, the standard metrics or bounce rates, and doesn't really say much. So what I tend to do if I'm reporting on those sites is, hopefully when a client comes to us, we do keyword research, massive keyword research at the beginning, and have content groups and then map URLs to, and so I can break that report into the different content groups I have. At this point, for keyword research, our content groups will usually be whatever's the head term for. So as I said before, if we have skirts, blouse, it will be dresses in that whole section. Or if the site is really big. If it's not that big a site, then you can have your men's, women's, and Excel and PowerPoint seem to be my go-to, because whilst you can pull in all those metrics, you'll need to drill down into why that content isn't performing well and what you need to do to improve it. And so that usually goes into PowerPoint. And I would say with these things, we just need to be careful not to overload the client with information, because as much as loads of information might denote value, it can be really overwhelming, and they might just be like, this is too much. So try and break it down as much as possible into the lowest denominator. If you can just pick dresses as a category and say, okay, these contents are performing well based on traffic and conversion, depending on what that content is meant to do. And that's where you need to analyze, is this content informational? Is it transactional? What is the purpose of this content? And so there's so many things to stitch together, which is why it's quite difficult to create a dashboard. I haven't seen any successful dashboard for content analysis. I have seen dashboards for pulling all the data together, all the visits, the impressions, stitching all the data from the URLs together. But I haven't seen anyone for analysis, which is why my go-to is always a PowerPoint to break it down and say, okay, this content isn't performing well because it's one of the, apart from keyword research for large sites, it's one of the longest tasks to do the SEO, because you have to not only look at how the content is performing, you have to look at the SERPs to see if the content is fulfilling the intent of the searchers. And you can say to the client, well, this content is never going to do well because Google sees this keyword as a transactional keyword, and the information that you have is the content you have is informational. So it's such a massive piece of work. So what my advice would be, break it down to give it to the clients in chunks. Say, if we can implement this first and then we see the value of this, I'll measure it and say, okay, and then we can do the next batch. There's loads to be done, but just make sure it's in batch. badges. And whilst you can pull all the data into Excel and say, okay, this content is performing well, this content isn't, you need to make sure that you are presenting it in a template. And I will always go to PowerPoint that is just easy to digest and pull out the key issues and compare.
Absolutely, without doubt. I've got one final question for you, Miracle, because we're running out of time. But while I'm asking that question, is there any chance you can whiz to the end of the slide deck and we'll to the holding slide, and then we can I can wrap up with that one as well. So basically, Jane, who's basically internal SEO and kind of thing, she's reporting up the chain. So touching on what we talked about is, the first thing we got into is the CMO language. How does she, as the SEO, is there any sort of language tips or things that you would focus on when you're going and talking to those senior people within the organization who, as you alluded to, have read about SEO or think they know about SEO, but then still need to hear about it in a certain way? Are there any sort of top things that you would, as an agency or as, when you're on that meeting talking to that senior person, that you would pull out and talk about first as such?
That's a tricky one, because they have an understanding, so you can't. I just tend to keep things simple. And I almost lead with asking them, so what have you heard about SEO recently, just to see how far back and how far back their knowledge goes, and how.
That's a good way of looking at it.
You say, how far, when last did you read, what do you think, and so you first of all ask them, so what do you think is new, and then you tell them this is what is new. And that kind, it's not really a game, but that sort of helps gauge where they are, and that sort of establishes where you are and shows that you're the person with with the most knowledge. And as much as possible, keep it simple. I hate, because as much as that person wants to show that they know SEO, they're not the only person in the room, and they're not the only person that you're talking to. So if you raise the bar and say, okay, I'm going to keep all the language with all the acronyms and stuff like that, you get them on board, but you lose everyone else.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
So I would say, as much as possible, remember that there are other people in the room, and then just set the bar by gauging where they are and say, what's the latest you've heard about the industry? This is what's happening, and this is what we can do to get to where we want to based on what's happening now. And that sort of, shifts the dynamic towards them listening to you, because you're more current than that person is, really.
Yeah. No, thank you, Miracle. Well, we're out of time. That's it. Big thanks to obviously you, Miracle, for taking the time to spend an hour with us and go through the topic that is proving the value of SEO. And obviously a huge thank you to everybody that has joined us today as well. As mentioned, the webinar will be live on the DC blog later this week for you guys to be able to download and listen back to on all these key points, and obviously see the slides and the URLs and everything that you want to see from this. Please, please, please do take the time to fill in the survey. We love the feedback. We want to hear about what you think and who you'd like to see on here. We've been doing this for a while now, and I think it's really key for us to get that feedback from you guys and understand who you'd like to see. Obviously, in a couple of weeks, we have our next webinar. We're doubling down in September. We have Mr. Luke Carthy, who's going to be coming on and talk about conquering e-commerce SEO. So again, somebody that, as feedback, people have said, hey, we'd like to see Luke. Well, here he is. So he's coming in a couple of weeks. Also, please take the time, jump on our website and download the Why CMOs Need to Get Enterprise SEO Right and Thrive in the Digital First World. It's a massive subject, and SEO is becoming more and more important to that CMO as part of their toolkit. Grab the white paper and have a read up, and there's some great tips there and on top of what Miracle's been talking about today. And please as well, save the date. On November the 18th, we're doing Deep Crawl Live. We're going to go for it on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. We're going at it from a UK-US perspective, and we're going at it all day. We've got some great things lined up, some great content, some great presenters. So please stick that one in your diary and come along and join us for what is Deep Crawl Live 2020. We're out of time, as I say. It's 5 o'clock. Safe journeys home, or good start to your days wherever you might be in the world. Thank you again, Miracle, for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, John.
My name's Jon Myers. This has been Proving the Value of SEO, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon on the next DC webinar. Thank you.